Before I proceed, again, I am John Paulo Dalupang, and I'm very much honored to moderate today's panel discussion. In today's panel, we are joined by esteemed individuals, researchers in this field of climate change, weather, disaster risk and resilience, and risk communication. We have with us a geologist, a climate scientist, and a communications practitioner. So this afternoon, we have three speakers. We have Dr. Alfredo Mahar Francisco Lagmay, we have Dr. Garry Bagtasa, and Mr. Val Vestil. So to begin our discussion, we will have Dr. Alfredo Mahar Francisco A. Lagmay. Dr. Lagmay is an academician of the National Academy of Science and Technology and professor at the National Institute of Geological Sciences at the University of the Philippines in Diliman. He is also the director of the University of the Philippines Nationwide Operational Assessment of Hazards, or UP-NOAA, which is a research center established to conduct research, development, and extension services on natural hazards, disaster risk reduction, and climate change actions. He's also the executive director of the UP Resilience Institute, an institution established to undertake research and creative work, disseminate research findings, establish non-degree educational programs, and support degree programs within the UP system. Furthermore, they also aim to improve the capability of the UP system as an agent of change to formulate and implement advanced academic programs on disaster resilience in the Philippines and the Pacific Rim region. He received his bachelor's and master's degrees in geology from UP Diliman, and he also received his PhD degree in Earth Sciences from the University of Cambridge in 2001. He was also a visiting scientist at the Geophysics Department of Stanford University from April 2006 to March 2007. And in 2013, Dr. Lagmay was awarded the Outstanding Filipino Award, or TOEFL, an honor given by the Junior Chamber International Senate of the Philippines to Filipino men and women whose exemplary achievements are worthy of emulation. In 2014 and 2015, his radio program on DZMM entitled Red Alert was recognized by numerous award bodies, including the Catholic Mass Media Award, Philippine Quill Awards, and the Hildegard Awards. In 2015, he also received, on behalf of the development team of the ARCO mobile app, the World Summit Award for Best Mobile App for Inclusion and Empowerment. Also in the same year, Dr. Lagmay was awarded with the Pillenius Medal of the European Geosciences Union for outstanding achievements in interdisciplinary natural hazard research and natural disaster engagement in the Philippines. He is also the first Asian to receive such an honor. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, we give you Dr. Mahar Lagmay. Dr. Lagmay, the floor is yours.
Yes, hello. Thank you, JP. I was given the task to talk about Project NOAA and the effect of messaging, message strategies on behavioral outcomes, I think, in the disaster efforts of the country. I still tested positive as of last night for COVID. So for about a week now, I've had COVID, but the viral load, I think, is much less. So let me begin by introducing what Project NOAA is all about. It was a program that was asked by President Aquino for DOST to create. And the secretary at that time contacted some of us, scientists in the University of the Philippines, to create a responsive program. So that was a tall order. When we first heard about this, to create a responsive program, remember this was in 2012. This was just after the Sendong disaster in 2011 that hit Iligan and Cagayan de Oro heavily. There were so many deaths. We were asked to do this program primarily to do flood mitigation, enhancement of geohazard maps, and enhancement of storm surge maps. So when I was asked to head it, I said yes. But after a month, I was asked to present to the president. So putting in place a responsive program, creating it and presenting that proposal, what kind of program it was to the president after 1 month of being given notice of that program. Okay, so it eventually turned out to become like this. No? Over the span of 6 years, it was funded by about 6 billion pesos by Congress. I was able to use probably, directly, because it's a program. There are about 21 projects underneath that program. And those that got funding were the projects and not the program itself. It started with the DREAM program for doing topographic maps or LiDAR, landslide mapping, storm surge mapping, which came in after, which was approved, by the way, after Yolanda happened. And then the FloodNet, the Stratcom, eventually after it gained traction, there was more funding, eventually led to funding the Diwata 1 and Diwata 2 and the satellite dishes that we purchased, which eventually I think became the Philippine Space Agency. So much for that. But when we were starting, there were some original projects like the hydromet sensors development, Dream LiDAR, the topography, flood mapping, hazards information, media efforts, landslides and geohazards efforts, Doppler system development. So these were the primary ones, coastal erosion and storm surge efforts. So for the hydromet sensors, we put in place locally developed sensors, rain gauges, automated rain gauges, stream gauges, and weather stations all over the country. I believe that it reached about 2,000 at its peak, and this, I believe, also is the one that saved many lives. Averted 15 disasters, and when I say saved many lives, it was responsible for providing information to do hazard-specific, area-focused, and time-bound warnings. So all of these sensors that were put in place all over the Philippines transmitted data every 15 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes, and were translated into contour maps that would tell the warning agencies, or specifically the NDRRMC, to find out where it is raining heavily, whether it's torrential, intense, heavy. And there's also a function wherein you can find the accumulated rainfall to provide the hazard-specific, area-focused, and time-bound warnings. So when the warning is provided, it is important also that it has corresponding response actions by the people. Because even if there's a warning, no matter how accurate, reliable, and understandable they are, if the people don't know what to do, the warnings will be useless. So if there's a warning, people must go. You don't want from one unsafe place to another unsafe place. So maps that are high resolution, like the one that you're seeing here, is very important. They are very important because it provides the people, those who take time to look at these maps, and getting acquainted or being familiar with the hazards in their neighborhood, would be able to take the appropriate response. And that's the responsibility of everybody. We also developed materials like this, wherein you could see the river of Marikina swell. So we are not just looking at a two-dimensional view of the river, of the water going up, but rather you're also seeing the plan view of the water, or how it's flooding in this part of Marikina River. I believe this was this is in Provident Village, and that was used by people. It was open data. People could see it, people could view it, and it empowered people because they had that facility to know what is happening in near real time. So they don't have to wait for the advisory at 5 o'clock in the morning, and then 11 o'clock in the morning, and 5 o'clock again in the afternoon, and then 11 o'clock again in the evening. So with the use of apps and making all of these available online using the available technologies, the internet, people were empowered. They were also encouraged to be part of the disaster effort by being active in trying to plot all of the flooded areas. They were also able to generate flood maps from crowdsourced data. So people, when they cooperate, they have better ownership and they get more engaged in the disaster effort. So all of these were put into some form of app that people can use. It made use of all of these web technologies, whatever they may be. So we created the NOAA, the ARCO, the flood patrol maps, the rain check, so that people can get empowered with near real-time data. With all of those efforts, NOAA got awards, about 9 international awards and 6 local awards. And by doing that, we were able to get, I think, people more interested about things that are important. So they got more interested because the maps were more high resolution. They were highly detailed, and based on this image or these panels, you can see that the actual map, which is generated by the people, the right panel is the same as the maps that were generated by the NOAA teams. These maps were created for the entire Philippines, 100% for landslides, 100% for storm surges, the 5th longest coastline in the world, and about 60% for floods until the Project NOAA was defunded in 2016. So the landslide maps were of barangay level, showing not just where the mountains are unstable, but if the mountain collapses, how far the landslide would travel. That's the runout of the landslide. So it was practically, the project was making use of the best available technologies to combat natural hazards impacts and to get people informed. So that's a way of communication. And it was also relying heavily on forecasts by Pag-asa and also of UP, primarily IESM. There was a program called NOAA WISE, wherein there were forecasts that were made hours in advance, and there were also days in advance forecasts. I was asked to do this, advisory watch warning. So basically, it's just about being less serious, more serious, and most serious. But we're really interested, since we're looking at disasters as almost always serious. So we look at it as warnings. So the landslide hazard maps that we produced improved on the ones that were being used before. In fact, these landslide maps that were used before look something like this, but with the use or the use of the knowledge of the stability of rocks, we were able to create landslide maps that were more detailed. So that's the panel shown a while ago, and you can see the different types of landslides. There are shallow landslides and structural landslides. The blue ones is the inventory showing the good fit, and then there are flood maps. When combined, you will see that the safe areas from the old maps, which only presented about 6.32% safe areas, became, when we used the best available technologies, to 47.54% safe areas. So we practically, or NOAA, transformed the mapping business into a business wherein it's not the hazards that were being looked at, but rather it was the safe places that were being identified. Because the business of hazards mapping is really to identify the safe places and not really to identify the hazards per se. So the business is about safe places. From 6.32%, we were able to increase that. For this area, it's about 47.54% safe areas for safe development by communities. So we also made the landslide inventory, and we came up with a lot of data sets identifying which regions are the ones that suffer most from landslides. And here we're seeing that it's the Cordillera Administrative Region, and Region 4 also is a place where many landslides happen. So the other part, another project was the hazards information, the use of media for disseminating hazards information. So we tried to look at Twitter, different types of platforms, social media platforms, even the traditional radio. So we had the DZMM platform used. This is at the time when ABS-CBN was still alive. During that time, there was this program called DZMM Red Alert. My partners were, at first, it was Jasmine Romero. Then she was changed to, Atom Arroyo replaced her. And then after some time, when Atom transferred to Channel 7, it was Jeff Canoy. So with Ted Esguerra. So we made use of different types of platforms to be able to effectively communicate. And whenever there's an opportunity to get interviewed, we would get interviewed to get the message across. So another project was the Doppler radar, Project NOAA, Yolanda. You can see that the eye of the storm, as well as the rainfall amount, or the rainfall that was happening at the time the Doppler was being transmitted, this image was being transmitted. It was not in decibels, but rather transformed into rainfall. I believe this is rainfall intensity. What is written there? But anyway, so you can use that to identify places that experience extreme rainfall at any particular time, because it was real-time data. And it was used also for understanding better phenomena. We found out that during Habagat, the mountains of Pinatubo, the Balikabok mountains, Natib volcano, as well as Mariveles volcanoes actually enhance the rains and deliver lots of rains in Manila Bay, and that causes a lot of extreme rains during Habagat season that is delivered in the area of Manila. So here are some simulations of Garry Bagtas. I'm happy that Jerry is going to talk, I believe, next to my talk. So these are the simulations that were made. The storm surge modeling project was also in place. It was approved after Yolanda. And you can see that there were some simulations that were used to track and see where the storm surges can happen. In fact, when Yolanda happened, there were areas that were identified to be places where storm surges would happen. Like for example, Leyte is identified here. I believe this was 2 days in advance, maybe 2 or 3 days in advance that we knew that storm surges will happen. In Eastern Samar, storm surges will happen as well. The communication was transmitted, the information was transmitted directly to Malacanang through channels, official channels. But I believe that there was something wrong in that communication in the sense that the information that was available was the height value, which was an absolute height of the storm surge in a relative landscape. What we needed at that time was were maps that were similar that are similar to the maps shown here in the right panel. What we had during that time before Yolanda made landfall was a map like this that was distributed to places in Leyte and Samar in 2010. You can see that the maps that reflected the storm surges were underestimated. They were just near the coastal areas. The green dots that you're seeing are evacuation centers. They are there because the maps that were given to the LGU did not show a large storm surge inundation event. So they were underestimated. I wish that the project was approved much earlier, because if it was approved earlier, we could have made storm surge simulations similar to the one that you're seeing in the right panel, wherein you can see a small storm surge, a bigger one, a much bigger one, a Yolanda type of storm surge. And with that kind of map, they're called probabilistic hazard maps, multi-scenario maps of a particular hazard, wherein you will see that the evacuation centers are in the wrong places. We also looked at the different types of tracks of typhoons and translated that into storm surge maps for the entire Philippines, and including storm surge maps that would reflect impacts due to climate change, as well as the compounded impacts of ground subsidence. So here we were able to generate flood maps by 2100 due to subsidence, and see what the scenario will be in the future. So all of those projects actually were implemented, and there were key messages that were delivered, that were addressed in all of those projects. Number one is that regional scale maps will not cut it. We had to make high resolution probabilistic hazard maps, multi-scenario hazard maps for a specific hazard using LiDAR and IFSAR. We needed a bottom-up approach. Government provides resources and vital information, but the community still needs to initiate disaster mitigation efforts. So all of these things, this messaging were in the back of our minds, and we were trying to make an effort to alleviate the impacts of natural hazards to different communities of the Philippines by following all of these. Like local capacity and local resources should be used in disaster mitigation plans, and that's why we bought the LiDAR ourselves instead of hiring commercial outfits. We trained ourselves so that we can make the cost of doing things much lower. Filipinos are the ones vulnerable in the country, and it is Filipinos that can best help themselves. On open data policy, we were advocating for sharing of data, because many scientists can work with the data and produce the best products. We need the best products to counter the adverse impacts of natural hazards. We also wanted better accessibility of data for the publics, and that's why we got them empowered through all of these social media tools and mobile apps and so on. The use of best technologies and cutting-edge science, research and development will not end and is applied or put into operations immediately. The development of a culture of safety, that is what we were hammering on. No amount of technology and science will be effective unless the people embrace them. We wanted to bridge the communication gap. I don't know if we were able to do this. We need the people to understand the mindset of the Filipino people in order to effectively communicate. To do this, it is not only the physical scientists that need to work on disaster preparedness, but also social scientists. And I don't know if this is relevant, resilience to hazards for business continuity. But it is important, we noted that it is important that everybody participates in the disaster efforts. Private sector, civil society organizations, religious groups, academic, government, and so on. And there was also a need to continue all of this research, because you cannot give a warning if you don't understand what you're warning about, and if you lack information to make a good decision in making that warning. So there's a really a need to build an army of disaster scientists, and hazards are here to stay, and we need to continue this effort even if it is costly. We also learned that in trying to communicate, we need to inspire, no? Kailangan mahuli yung kiliti ng mga tao, no? Ay, hindi ko alam kung bakit. They're not interested. Maybe they're busy with other things, pero kailangan mong makuha yung kiliti, no? For example, ito, latest tweet, I made a tweet, latest position and track of Typhoon Pablo, no? This was a super typhoon. This killed many people. I got 15 retweets. So this guy, at the same time, Mario, COO Mario, no, I guess he's famous. He just said, more or less at the same time that I tweeted it, good afternoon po, 680 retweets. No? So the lesson here maybe is that, ang dami pa sumasagot, no? Good afternoon, Mario baby, I love you. Sino ba tong pangalan na to? Basta si Mario. Anyway, even from Thailand, no? Hi Mario, Chak Rangkun. So we noticed that kailangan ng mga celebrities, no? Para mag-deliver ng message. We also noticed na kailangan pag makuha mo yung kulite, you get more attention, no? For critical messages that they need to know. So pag sinabi mo ang love parang bagyo yan, mahirap i-predict kahit may pag-asa. So marami, 125 retweets ang makukuha. So pati ang news pipikapin din, no? Mahirap i-predict kahit pag-asa. So kailangan makuha mo pa yung kiliti. I don't know why, no? So this is something that sociologists will can probably look at, no? Meron pang isa, no? Forecast track and satellite image of Typhoon Santi. This was the typhoon, I believe, before Yolanda, no? So this was October 11. If I'm not mistaken, Yolanda was in November of 2013. So pakishare din po ito sa inyong mga kaibigan at mga kababayan. I got only 29 retweets and 2 favorites. For such an important typhoon, no? It was about to make landfall. I changed it. I thought of changing it. I was just trying to make an experiment. Sabi ko, imbis palitan ko kaya, sabi ko, forecast track and satellite image of Typhoon Santi. Mag-retweet nito ay gaganda ang love life. From 29 retweets, naging 90 retweets. From 2 favorites, naging 12 favorites. No? So lessons that we got from that was importante ang celebrities, mga disaster ambassadors siguro. I think they're called disaster ambassadors for disaster communication. Pacquiao was used in the messaging. Ito, si Pacquiao yan. We drew it based on that picture. Pacquiao was part of Safe PH. Pacquiao is the new face of disaster preparedness. Si Dennis, tama ba? Dennis Padilla ba to? Hindi ko alam kung basta Padilla yan. So medyo nakausap din namin siya. Si Ann Curtis and Puya Kim, we're trying to disseminate information for Project NOAA. Hindi namin nakuha ito. Nanay ni Pacquiao, sinubukan din namin kuhanin to reach more people, but I think that was unsuccessful. Now what we're doing is we're trying to make use of other platforms, no? Like for example, board games. Gumawa yung UPRI Research and Creative Work ng board game. It's called Sakunwari, wherein you can practice. It's a good way of getting them to be familiar with the terms, no? We are also using art, no, to communicate. Like for example, for alert levels per taal, this is how we do it, just to get people informed. That's alert level 1. This is alert level 2. So we try to use art, no? Mga drawing. These are my drawings, by the way. You can follow me on YouTube, subscribe and like. Just look for Mahar Lagmay. There's a hazards in unit series there. 4 in 10. That's alert level 4, and alert level 5 would look something like this. So it would be a hazardous eruption, and there would be lava flows or base surges that would be flowing out of the mouth of Taal. Okay. So here is another example of how we use art, no? Maybe music integrated with a video, to get people informed, to be able to communicate better. So please watch this. So we integrated some music, homegrown music. I think there's a project with about 10 songs made for climate change adaptation examples. So this one was played earlier by the same professor of UP, and it was merged with this movie.
ng paglikas tungo sa kaligtasan, to'y hindi karuwang ka. Pagkilos ay katiyakan tungo sa kaligtasan, doon itakis kapitbahay kaibigan. Maglikas sa lindol, ito hindi kaduwagan. Ito ay pagkilos mo tungo sa kaligtasan. Maglikas sa lindol ay hindi kaduwagan. Ito ay pagkilos tungo sa kaligtasan. Pag lumilindol, lahat gumagalaw, parang sumasayaw. Mga bagay-bagay. Kapag lumilindol, lahat gumagalaw, parang sumasayaw. Ang tamang gawin ay tupa! Napaka muna, don't panic. Tagot na muna, don't panic. Salikas at matibay, don't panic. Sabihan mo sila, don't panic. Napaka
Anyway, I'll end that. You can just watch that on YouTube. The ultimate question, the bottom line is, did all of these things work? The government invested a lot. Did it work in terms of reducing the damage, the losses and damages from hydromet hazards like floods, landslides, and storm surges? If we look at the total damages from 1986 to 2021, you can see that more or less the damage is the same. It's about 50 billion pesos per year. That's the losses that we incur from disasters due to due to severe weather events. But if we look at the fatalities per year, fatalities per year from 1986 to 2012. No? Medyo yung hayan was errant. No? So 2012, the number of fatalities per year was about 1,000 to 1,250. But if you look at the range or the period from 2014 to 2021, the number of fatalities per year became only about 250. So that's a reduction of deaths per year from 1986 to 2011 from about 1,000 to 1,250 to 250. That's about 750 to 1,000 saved lives per year, if we like to look at that. So if you were to ask me, was there any change? I don't know if it was because of NOAA. Maybe it was a collective effort. Maybe it was because of Haiyan. I would like to think that all of these efforts by Project NOAA contributed, because after all, by 2014, that was the time when we were able to join the National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Council, wherein the PDRA, or the Pre-Disaster Risk Assessment, was introduced, and where the hazard-specific area focus and time-bound warnings were introduced as well. So it was from 1,000 to 1,250 to 250 deaths per year. But if you would look at that, something happened also, although it's slow from 2014 to 2021. If you will look at it in terms of mass casualties in a locality, sometime in 2018 to 2019, there were still disasters happening in a particular barangay or adjacent barangays. So that is still something that we need to address. But largely, I believe there were efforts that we made in communicating information, risk information, including warnings, that help us improve our disaster risk reduction efforts in the country. From a World Risk Index of 3, we are now number 8. So what I'm showing is 9, but we're actually now number 8, based on the latest surveys. I end here. So again, this was from a slide presentation that I made a long time ago. I don't know why this is here, but I guess it still applies. Wherever you go, no matter what the weather, always bring your own sunshine. Thank you very much, everybody, for listening.
Thank you very much, Professor Lagmay, Dr. Lagmay. I think even if this was an older presentation, the messages are still true for today. No, it continues to resound, the different ideas that we ought to really get into as a community, as a country. No, the idea, I was writing down notes during your presentation, and it seems that we're still trying to push for more mainstreaming, sir, no, of disaster risk resilience and risk communication. So as Dr. Lagmay said, there have been a lot of policy changes in government, and maybe we can talk more about this later during the panel. Thank you, Dr. Lagmay. Dr. Lagmay will be with us until later. I just want to ask all the participants to please feel free to put in your questions and your comments about our presenters' inputs today. And please feel free to put it in the chat box so we can consolidate them. Okay? From Dr. Lagmay, we now move on to our next panelist, which Dr. Lagmay have briefly introduced during the presentation, Dr. Garry Bagtas. Dr. Bagtas is currently a full professor at the University of the Philippines and a research fellow at the Oscar M. Lopez Center, and also the creator-developer of the website www.weather-manila.com. Dr. Bagtas has published extensively in the areas of weather and climate, remote sensing, and air quality. In 2004, he was a research student at the Center for Environmental Remote Sensing in Chiba, Japan. Dr. Bagtas also has mentored students through his over 20 years of teaching in De La Salle University and UP. Dr. Bagtas holds a Bachelor and Master of Science degrees in physics, from De La Salle University, and a Doctor of Philosophy degree in Science from Chiba University in Japan. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Garry Bagtas. Good afternoon, sir. The floor is yours.
Hello, good afternoon. Maraming salamat, Sir JP. Let me just share my screen. This is about communicating or miscommunicating weather information. So again, I'm Garry Bagtas with the Institute of Environmental Science and Meteorology of the University of the Philippines. I got some snippets of information from weather forecasting. I also do forecasts in terms of modeling and so on. So I'm from the perspective of the people doing the forecast, but I also see that many of the forecasts, even though they are good and very useful, are misunderstood by many people. So may loss in translation. So that's what I want to focus on in this talk. So how are weather forecasts made unang-una? So one of the most ubiquitous way of doing weather forecasts is with the use of computers. So many institutes in worldwide have supercomputers, and they run itong models computer models, to see what the future will what the future will bring, or what weather in the future will be. So linalagay sa grids yung atmosphere natin, and then they simulate yung wind flow, how the clouds form, and so on, and essentially using these super large computers. And then I'm sure many of you are familiar with this visualization. So these are websites that visualizes essentially the computer models, the outputs of the computer models from different institutions, from different weather agencies. So yung two of the most famous global weather models are the ECMWF, which stands for European Center for Medium Range Forecasting. So it's a consortium between many European countries, and the US model GFS, which we usually see as this. There's a limitation in terms of itong models na to. So the thing is, they are too coarse. So yung resolution nila, it's like having a picture with a low resolution camera. So we cannot really zoom into certain locations to see how the weather will be. So there's another way of further improving this weather forecast, and it's with the use of high performance computing, or HPC. So this can be done locally. Dito sa atin wala tayong supercomputer, so we have to rely on this big weather models. But here locally, we can actually do the downscaling na tinatawag. So meaning we increase the resolution using high performance computers. And in fact, we're able to do that. Me personally, I have a website, Weather Manila, which is able to do the rainfall at relatively high resolution of around 4 kilometers. Pag-asa has also high performance computing with the resolution of around 12. And although hindi nila pinapakita publicly, they also have a 3-kilometer resolution model. So when you look at your app, I'm sure many of you, pag weather forecast, you look at yung websites and apps, and these apps like Weather Underground, which personally is my favorite, itong Windy, Weather Channel, and things like this, they actually come from itong mga models na to. So global models, a little bit low resolution, but they are adjusted so that we can see them in a different visualization. So even the things that the visualization that we see on TV, like for Channel 2, Channel 7, they're actually from the models that I mentioned also. So yun yung pinaka I think ubiquitous way of doing weather forecasts currently, at least in the past 20 years or so. Balik lang tayo ng konti on, I think rain is the most important weather parameter here in the Philippines. Diba? In terms of temperature, doesn't really change that much. So we wear the same types of clothes all year round. Doesn't really matter, diba? But for rain, it's very important. And just a little review, we have actually two types of rain-producing clouds. In case nakalimutan nyo na. No? So we have the cumulonimbus clouds, which looks like yung fluffy clouds, and essentially, di ba, we see this in the noontime, afternoon, and then by late afternoon, there will be heavy rainfall in certain areas. Certain areas in the Philippines. We also have this type of cloud called the stratus clouds or nimbus stratus clouds, wherein it's just overcast condition, and then you have a little bit of rainfall all day long. So just like yung, I suppose today, more or less, partly nimbus stratus, partly cumulonimbus. So the reason why I'm telling you that there are two types of rain-producing clouds, kasi in forecasting rainfall, we actually don't forecast the rainfall itself. What we forecast is the formation of clouds. So once you're able to forecast the formation of clouds and where the clouds will be, consequently, you will see yung rainfall forecast. But the thing is, itong cumulonimbus clouds, the white fluffy clouds, these are prevalent in the tropics like our country. These are driven by small scale na mga phenomenon. So you can see in satellite, for example, you can see these tiny clouds. These are the cumulonimbus clouds. And ang analogy dito is when you have a boiling water, will you be able to predict kung saan magpa-pop out yung bubble? It's almost impossible to do that. And it's the same thing with these cumulonimbus clouds. It's almost impossible to predict where the clouds will pop and bring rain. On the other hand, ito naman nimbus stratus clouds, these are large scale, so malaki siya, dito covering half of the Philippines in fact, and these are slow moving and easier to predict. The problem is most of the rain that we get are from this type of cloud. That's the reason why it's very difficult to predict rainfall here in the tropics, which includes the Philippines obviously. Kaya mahirap. So sometimes I hear, di ba, na sasabihin sa US, ganda ng forecast. Dito sa atin, ang pangit kasi kasalanan ng Pag-asa. But in fact, when you look at why the forecasts are different, it's because rain comes from different types of clouds, and it's just so difficult to predict itong cloud na to, na mostly where we get our rain. Also, there are other ways of predicting. So meron tinatawag na, instead of forecast, we call it nowcast. So the lead time is shorter. So within 4 to 6 hours. So mangyayari na siya very soon, 4 to 6 hours, and we predict what will happen in the next 4 to 6 hours. So we call that nowcast. So one way of doing that is with the use of balloons. So in case you didn't know, so Pag-asa launches balloons, several sites in the Philippines. Ito yung mga sites na to. Twice a day, and each balloon costs around 30 to 40,000 pesos. And once lumipad siya, pumutok siya, wala na, that's it. So it's really expensive, pero kailangan natin siya. So yung isang ginagawa ng balloon is that, sabi ko nga, di ba, it's like boiling water, and you can predict where the bubbles will be. However, you can know if the water is boiling in the first place, diba? That's what the balloons do, parang ganun eh. So when we launch a balloon, depending on how it floats in air, we'll know na later on, baka magkaroon tayo ng thunderstorm. So kung nakikita nyo itong mga thunderstorm advisories or watch information from Pag-asa, the watch and information actually comes from balloon observations. So done daily. Ito naman advisory, these are done by, nabanggit kanina ni Doc Mahar, on radar. So by looking at the radar, if the cloud is moving this way in the past 3 hours, diba? So ang assumption natin, it will still move towards the same direction in the next 4 hours. So we can forecast then kung uulan or hindi dun sa certain region. So these are advisories under the Pag-asa forecast. There's also the rainfall warning system. So ito, maraming misconception dito eh. So the rainfall warning system, yung red, orange, yellow, it's actually based on observation. So it's not a forecast. So once it's being observed already, let's say for example, somewhere in Manila right now, umuulan na malakas, tapos sasabihin, yellow. So that means umuulan na siya. It's not a forecast. It will not happen later. It's happening now. And yun, ang akala, ang impression ko, akala ng tao karamihan, this is a forecast, which makes a big difference. Kasi, like for example, one of the criteria in cancellation of classes recently is pagka I'm not sure kung yellow or nag-orange eh. So pag nangyari to, yellow or orange, then classes are canceled. So dalawang klase yan. If it's raining 4 a.m. in the morning, tapos sabihin natin orange, nag-cancel ng classes, doesn't matter what will happen later on. So later on, maaaring hindi na umulan, canceled na yung classes. I don't know whether that's good or bad. Another thing is, pumasok na tayo sa school, and then 1 o'clock in the afternoon, tapos nag-yellow warning. So sasabihin, canceled yung classes. So pumasok na tayo, di ba? So ganun. So I mean, there are problems with this by not understanding well that this is an observation rather than a forecast. Yun yung gusto sabihin dito. But anyway, these are done by different weather agencies, not only by Pag-asa, kahit sa ibang ginagawa naman talaga tong warning na to, which is based on observation. So how about the state of weather forecasting? How accurate are forecasts now? So yung accuracy really depends on many things, and it can mean a lot of things as well. So it depends on what weather parameter we're looking at. So if we're looking at temperature, then the accuracy is actually high, but we're not really concerned about the temperature, di ba? So if the temperature right now, say for example, is 30 degrees Celsius and the forecast is 29.5, doesn't really matter to us yung half a degree na difference na yon. But if you're talking about rainfall, uulan ba o hindi, then there's accuracy for that. Pero kung tatanungin mo naman ay uulan ba ng malakas o uulan ng sobrang lakas, then the meaning of accuracy for those two questions will be totally different. So kaya ang daming it's difficult in short to answer what the accuracy of weather forecast is, kasi it really depends on the parameter. But what we can see here is that say for example yung error ng tropical cyclones, for example, position, it's been decreasing from the late 80s until recently. So ngayon, from around almost 200 kilometers yung error at a certain lead time, it's down to around 40 kilometers. So that's actually a lot. So all the research and studies in the past 20 or 30 years dito napunta, and we've been improving in terms of forecasting tropical cyclones, in terms of forecasting other things like yung ito yung height ng height ng atmosphere, which is important in determining weather as well. So we can see that the scale is increasing since from 1984 to 2013, mataas yung pag-increase. We can also see different parameters here like sea level pressure, wind, temperature. So it really depends on the parameter. So on one hand, it's difficult to say yung accuracy, but on the other hand, we can say definitely that it has improved in the past 20 years. So makikita nyo naman yan, di ba, doon sa app na tinitignan nyo. In many instances, the app will be correct in terms of determining whether it will rain or not. Kasi yun nga, there has been a lot of improvements in determining yung forecast. Also in computing, yung computers mas malalakas ngayon, they also help in the forecast. So when I say miscommunicate, I don't mean na mali yung forecast. So it can be that the forecast is wrong, but also it can be that the forecast is received not clearly. So the forecast can be correct, it can be right 100%, but if it's not clearly understood, then the forecast is deemed miscommunicated. So there are many instances wherein I see personally, so medyo anecdotal, but also I look at mga literature on these are also being observed in different countries. So let me give you an example in sa communicating weather information about tropical cyclones, kasi tropical cyclones are really devastating, and di ba, a lot are affected by it. So ito yung usually na pinapakita na forecast for tropical cyclones. But for me, this makes a lot of sense. But over time, I see that there's a lot of misinterpretation that's happening here. So unang-una is that what I see from different interactions with different people is that yung typhoon is depicted as a point here. But in reality, typhoon has a size of several hundred kilometers. So several hundred, that's huge. Diba? It can be still in the Philippine Sea, yung center niya, and these dots, they actually depict the center. It can be in the Philippine Sea, pero it's already affecting some parts of the Philippines. So recently, I met sa LGU ng Caraga. So involved in disaster risk reduction and management. No? So involved na siya. And then sabi niya, yung forecast kasi ng Pag-asa, tatama si Typhoon Odette. This is Odette, by the way, yung malakas na typhoon late last year. Sabi tatama siya ng hapon ng, I forget the date, December 15 ba yun? I cannot remember the date. Pero sabi, tatama siya around 1 to 2 p.m. in the afternoon. And the forecast was actually correct. Tumama siya ng around 1:30 or so. But the NDRRMC na person dun sa Caraga, sabi niya, mali yung forecast ng Pag-asa. Sabi nila 1:30. But in fact, 9 o'clock pa lang ng umaga na ang lakas na ng hangin. Which, di ba, pareho both. Tama si Pag-asa, tama din siya. But there's a di ba, may loss in the translation in giving information like this, nakalimutan na in fact it covers a large area, larger than the point being depicted by forecasts like this. So isa yun, yung uncertainty is also neglected a lot because for one, it's difficult to convey. So nakikita niyo rito, di ba, palaki ng palaki yung bilog. So many think that it's because the typhoon will become larger and larger in size. But in fact, this conveys uncertainty. So in fact, hindi siya sa gitna lang. So pwede siya magkamali, a little bit to the left, a little bit to the right, pero within the tinatawag na cone of uncertainty. This is also a little bit difficult for a lot of people to understand and difficult to convey. Also, isa pa, yung rain is not considered in characterizing tropical cyclones. So pag sinabi natin malakas ang bagyo, it actually has nothing to do with rain but all to do with wind. Pero karamihan sa atin, most of the damages in fact are due to water-related hazards like rainfall. So medyo confusing yun for a lot, which is understandably so, di ba? Yung rain, yung kadalasan ang takot natin, babaha ba, may landslide pa, which are related to rain. Yet everything that is being shown here is about wind, nothing to do with rain. So I think yun, medyo magulo yun. Yung PAR, the Philippine Area of Responsibility, depicted by itong dash line na to, is actually not the Philippines. This is given to us by yung World Meteorological Organization for a different purpose. It's not about because when inside affected ang Pilipinas, pag outside hindi affected. No. It's different from that yung reason, which I will not go to kasi mahabang story yun. No? But paminsan nakakagulo siya kasi many equate the Philippine Area of Responsibility with the Philippines, which will also make things complicated in terms of messaging. Also, marami rin kahit na mga personal na kakilala ko, poor knowledge in geography. So sometimes, yeah, we have this information, but many, actually, we don't know where we are in this map. So are we affected or not? we can't answer. So even if given this information, di pa rin natin alam kung affected ba tayo o hindi. Which is a valid na ano yun, na problem yun, and valid na yun nga sa atin. So yung cone of uncertainty that I was saying, so pag lumalaking ganito, it's not because the typhoon is getting larger and larger, no. It's just that the track of the typhoon can be within any of this location na. So if you look at the Pag-asa forecast or the forecast from Japan, even the forecast from the US, lahat sila nagpapakita ng gano'n. So this is a forecast from DILG, which I think is a bad way of depicting rainfall kasi wala siyang uncertainty. But again, yun nga yung point ko is that sometimes the uncertainty is difficult to convey kasi pag sinabi mong hindi ka sure, many would take that as mali yung forecast, which is arguably tama naman, di ba? Sometimes we really it's difficult to understand na pag uncertain ng isang bagay, di ba? Pag tinanong kita, kain tayo dyan, masarap ba? Baka masarap. Hindi ako maniniwala sa iyo, di ba? But of course your uncertainty can also say na baka hindi mo magustuhan pero para sa akin masarap. Something like that. So ewan ko kung tama ba yung analogy na yun. Also yung probabilistic forecast. So I'm sure you've seen forecasts showing, diba, 80% chance of rainfall, 90% chance of rainfall, 0% chance of rainfall. So yung chance of rainfall, what does it mean? This is often misinterpreted, and in fact, doing surveys, may isang paper by, I cannot pronounce this name. There's a paper from before na nag-survey siya. So ano ba ibig sabihin nito? And surveying different people, they found that different answers. So yung 30% chance of rain, di ba? For some, it means 30% of the time it will rain. For others, that means 30% of the area will have rainfall. Or 30% of days like tomorrow will have rainfall. So yun yung interpretation. So in short, different interpretations for different sets or groups of people. Sa iba naman, pag sa forecasting naman, ang mga forecasters sinanong, it will be 3 out of 10 forecasters will predict rain on a day similar to what we're looking at. So, di ba, ang point dito is iba't ibang interpretation. How can it be the same thing if the interpretation is different for different people? So, obviously, misinterpreted most of the time. So, mahirap. Recently, I on Twitter may nag-aaway nga nasabi, hinaaway yung bagong resident meteorologist of ABS-CBN, si Ariel. Inaaway siya, sabi ni walang kwenta talaga tong forecaster na to, sabi niya 30% mag-uulan tapos ganun naman. And that is born from this misinterpretation. But when I say misinterpretation, doesn't mean that it's the fault of the people receiving the forecast. It also doesn't mean that it's the fault of the forecaster. So dapat kasi, di ba, in many instances, dapat intuitive yung design. So maybe many of you are familiar with the Norman door. Di ba yung door na confusing, na sometimes you have something like this pero push pala siya. Pero ang mas magandang design is that when you have something like a push door, dapat walang handle. If you have a pull door, may handle siya. So intuitively, without thinking, alam natin yung gagawin. And I think it should be somewhat the case for forecasting. So for us to know that, we need to know ano yung impression, ano yung how do people receive yung forecast. So I look at yung user sentiments for Yolanda sa Facebook, but this is a bit long time ago. Looking at yung mga mga comments sa Facebook ng Pag-asa. So the dark blue are people looking for information. Say for example, yung dito ba sa lugar ko tatamaan, sa lugar ba ng relative ko tatamaan, and so on. We also have emotions like OMG, lagot, something like that. looking for yung family nila, religion, if praying or something na religion, no? About religion yung comments. Something about science that I found na sobrang konti, less than 0.1% mentioning science. About safety and preparedness, meron din. So about that. And thinking, essentially pag-asa. And then we can see here that this is a landfall time. Ito yung time, no? This is a time of landfall. We can see that most of the information being sought from pag-asa and yung nagdadasal is just a few hours before landfall. So a day, for example, a day before landfall, mababa compared to just a few hours. So night before and then a few hours before landfall. And then also after landfall. So another study by a colleague of mine, Dr. Vallejo. So si Chedeng naman yung tinignan nila. So they found that almost all tweets, so Twitter yung tinignan nila instead of Facebook, people were concerned. People are willing to give help. But generally, neutral yung sentiments. So the neutral sentiments implies that people are habituated to the concept of tropical cyclones. And it's not really hindi talaga ngayon may dapat tayong gawin. Yung hindi yung ganun, yung urgency ba? Wala, because where people are habituated. Of course, this is only for Facebook and Twitter, so skewed yung tinitignan ng mga tao. But diba, at least this is a glimpse of what people are thinking. And yung sa colleague ko, they found that yung DRRM practitioners, they have around less than 2 days to get their message effectively for social media. Kasi yun nga, it's the last few hours before something really happens. Doon nagsa-surge yung looking for information. So there's actually a paradigm shift. Although this is overlapping from the talk of Doc Mahar, no? There's a paradigm shift in communicating hazards. So instead of saying what the weather will be, ngayon, it should be what the weather will do. So if I tell you na ang ulan for tomorrow will be 50 millimeters rain. So sino ba naman nakakaintindi, di ba? Na 50 millimeters rain. I should tell you na yung ulan bukas will be enough para pabahain yung lugar mo. In that case, di ba? Proper preparations will be done kasi alam mo ano mangyayari. Instead of just saying na the winds of the typhoon will be 120 kilometers per hour. So, di ba, sometimes, not sometimes, a lot of times people will not understand what 120 kilometer per hour wind will do. Pero kung sinabi na malakas yung hangin, babagsak yung mga puno, then we understand what to do and how to prepare. So this is called impact-based forecasting. And impact-based forecasting is yung approach na ito is just aside from looking for the hazard, we also look for the exposure and the vulnerability of the people that will be affected by the hazards. So tinitingnan natin likelihood of the risk and likelihood of the impact. Kung mababa both, then maybe there's no action to be taken, but depending on what we get, anticipatory action. So kahit na hindi pa nangyayari, we anticipate for these hazards to occur. So which is much related to the earlier talk. So yesterday, ito yung sa Japan, may dumaan na bagyo doon di ba? So ito yung impact-based multi-hazard forecast nila. So although it's in Japanese, so yung black ay malakas na ulan. The purple ay malakas na ulan including landslides. The red includes high waves and so on. So pinapakita niya na per prefecture, there will be certain hazards like this. So yun, we go down into detail tulad ng mga maps na pinakita ni Doc Mahar kanina. So Japan obviously they also have that and look at where people should be located or relocated. So yesterday nakita ko rin, which I think is apt, that si Fiona naman tumama sa Puerto Rico. So storm category doesn't really tell us what the damage will be kasi it really depends on the vulnerability of the community. So di ba si Fiona, yung around 3-5 years ago, I think 2017, si Maria na tumama rin sa Puerto Rico, which devastated Puerto Rico, wasn't really that strong. But because Puerto Rico is vulnerable, more than 3,000 namatay. And since fresh pa sa isip nila, I suppose, and nakinig sila sa forecast and the warnings in the past few days, kanina nakita ko parang iilan lang, 1 or 2 yung casualties so far. So it's not as damaging as it was 5 years ago kay Maria. So gusto kong sabihin, si Pag-asa is actually got funding from the Green Climate Fund. They got $20 million to shift to a multi-hazard impact-based forecasting. Kasi si WMO, yun na rin yung geared towards yung mga communication. It's really about impact-based. It's not about yung meteorological base or weather base kasi it's difficult to understand for many people, and in this case, diba, hopefully it will become better in terms of communicating this. That's it. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bagtasa. That's a very interesting take, no, on looking at miscommunication. So it's not really the accuracy of information, but it's how people actually consume and make sense of the information. So, thank you very much, sir, for that presentation. Let's now move forward to something that's even more related to communication. Now, we will have now Mr. Val Vestil, who is a communications practitioner. So, Mr. Vestil has devoted much of his personal and professional life advocating for environmental journalism and working in the fields of youth development and peace building. He had previously served as the advocacy and communications officer of a UNICEF-funded project for out-of-school youth in Zamboanga City, and as the media content producer of a peace-building NGO based in Mindanao, working on social behavioral change communications. Currently, he serves as the executive director of the Association of Young Environmental Journalists. Their website is on www.ayej.org, which he founded shortly after graduating from Silliman University with a degree in mass communication, magna cum laude. AYEJ is an environmental nonprofit and media organization focused on implementing capacity building projects, knowledge production development, and media content production. So ladies and gentlemen, we have Mr. Vestil. Sir, you have the floor.
Right. Good afternoon, everybody. Okay pa ba ang lahat? If everybody is still, we have almost 300 participants here. If my audio is clear, if it's audible, can you please tell me where you are right now in the comments, in the Zoom comment section? Kasi baka tulog na. That was we had 2 very engaging and informative talks. Baka sa ikatlong talk ay tulog na po tayo, wala nang nandito. Okay. I learned a lot from, as a journalist, no, I always listen to scientists, and I learned a lot from Dr. Lagmay and Dr. Bagtasa, and that was extremely informative. In fact, my talk this afternoon is a rejoinder to the information of Dr. Lagmay and Dr. Bagtasa. In fact, I will reference Dr. Lagmay at a certain point in my talk. So thank you, everybody. Ayun, madami pa pala. Nasa Naga, Manila, Antipolo, Bulacan, QC, Malabon, Las Piñas, nasa spaceship po sa Venus. Sana all. Thank you po for your attendance, and I am sure that we have all made time to learn more about weather, about the climate. But now we will shift the conversation to the perspective of the media, or a content or a media practitioner or a journalist. I am, ayun, as introduced, I founded the Association of Young Environmental Journalists, or AYEJ, and we are really dedicated to communicate the sciences and communicate environmental issues because, and I will talk more about this later, because we realized that there is not so much coverage in the local media about environmental issues or climate issues. But we're a Edge and we're a startup media organization. It was originally a Barkada thing, a Barkada organization in 2017. But then in 2019, we registered it to SEC. And after working with UNICEF for 1 year, I decided not to resign from UNICEF and work full-time on the Association of Young Environmental Journalists in 2020. Our mission and vision is to enable communities to be ecologically literate and proactive towards a more livable planet. Basically, the great work that Dr. Lagmay, the great work that scientists have been doing, we want to communicate them as journalists. Now, that is our goal and our long-term impact and vision as an organization. Before I proceed to my talk proper, just a quick introduction of who we are at AEDGE in case you are interested to use your communication skills to communicate climate and environmental issues. We have what we call the ABCs of AEDGE. These are our 3 strategic approaches on how to make sure that we achieve our mission and our vision. First is amplifying conversations, B is for building capacity, and C is for creating content. We do a lot of online and offline campaigns that bridge young people, emerging advocates with scientific experts, with climate movers, with environmental champions, and then we map out a lot of issues, environmental issues within the community. The photo that you see here is one of our last Usapang Kalikasan sessions where we mapped out environmental issues within Cagayan de Oro City and we endorsed them to the Oro Youth Development Office. This happened in February 2020. I will not forget it because ito po yung month before the pandemic. And because of the pandemic, we had to migrate everything from offline to online. So we really want to have conversations and discussions on the importance of media, the role of media in tackling urgent environmental issues. So we've had Atom Araulio, for example, Leilani Chavez from Monga Bay. We're not only talking about journalism, we're also using film. So we've had film screenings on award-winning animated short films on the environment, and we invite the directors of these short films for a conversation. So isa yan sa mga ginagawa namin in amplifying conversations. Yung building capacity talaga ang core ng ginagawa namin as an organization. We build the capacities of young and emerging journalists and communicators so that they know how to effectively tell the climate and environmental story. So our projects have been funded by US Embassy, Unilab Foundation, as we talk on health journalism as well. And we've gone as far as Dumaguete, Oriental Mindoro, Palawan, and in fact, we just finished recently during the pandemic our Boracay workshop where we brought together 20 journalists and communicators from all over the Philippines to Boracay to learn more about environmental journalism. And of course, very important in the work that we do is engaging as well with indigenous people who are the frontline guardians of our forests. Forests and the climate are very much connected, but that's for another talk and conversation. We've also connected with the Department of Education in the first ever environmental journalism training of DepEd Central through the Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Service. We really put a premium on telling more stories about the environment. And we're proud about the publications that have received the stories written by young people when it comes to climate and the environment. We have also had international engagement, specifically with the EU-ASEAN for Climate Diplomacy Week. We don't only want to talk about how the Philippines is adapting to the climate crisis, but we also want to talk with our neighbors. How are they adapting to the crisis? And what can we do about it as journalists and storytellers? And finally, to close off this just quick introduction, creating content. And this is the introduction really to my talk this afternoon on how can we use media? What is the current state of communicating weather, of communicating sciences, of communicating the environment? Apart from creating articles that are published, we also do a lot of film and documentary. So we've covered works by women entrepreneurs and how they use jeans and pants and reuse them for these anong tawag nito toys that they resell to the community. Again, we cover indigenous people through our documentary projects. And this is mainly the kinds of stories that we produce as an organization in terms of climate change and the environment. These were written by young people, and we're proud about the kind of content we're sending out there because of a problem that I will post to you in the next few slides. Our work has been published by Rappler, The Inquirer, and Mongabe. If you can see, these are really more stories that are more positive and more solutions oriented and more informational, because we realized that young people are tired of bad, complicated, difficult to consume kind of environmental and climate news. Our story really began in 2017 when we realized we did an analysis of how the coverage of environmental stories in the national mainstream media. At ito lang po yung nakikita namin. Drugs, crime, politics, entertainment, business. These are the only things we talk about. The mainstream media talks about in our analysis of front page stories in the research that we did. And that was problematic at the time. This was in 2016, no? Kasi sabi namin, bakit hindi masyadong naglaland sa front page yung mga environmental stories, yung mga climate stories. I'm not saying these news items are unimportant, because they are important. But I'm asking, why don't we talk about the climate and the environment enough in the media, landing front page? But then people would argue, oh, we have actually covered the environment and it lands front page in our newspaper. Sabi ko, oh, kailan? Dito, when crisis has struck. Tama po ba? We only talk about the environment when the storm has passed. We only talk about mainstream media. We only talk about the environment and its connection with climate and flooding when disaster has taken the lives of so many people. And this is close to my heart because this is the front page story of all national news, of the selected mainstream media newspapers a day after Typhoon Sendong hit Cagayan de Oro, where I am currently a resident of. It's death, death, death. For me, this is not the best that climate reporting has to offer, or environment reporting. For me, this is not climate communications or environment communications. For me, this is disaster communications. And when a disaster has already struck, your audiences, kayo po, 291 people in the Zoom room, can do nothing about it anymore. It is only a warning of the next typhoon. It is only a report on how many lives this typhoon has taken. It is only a report on the calamity and destruction that has set the Philippines. And to me, that is not proactive in our role as media practitioners. So this is the core of what IEDGE has been trying to do. To talk more about climate and environment even before disaster strikes. Alam ko you've heard of eco-anxiety among young people. Can you just comment me if you've experienced eco-anxiety sa ating Zoom chat box, yung feeling na overwhelmed ka na, you feel helpless, you feel powerless kasi ang daming nangyayari. Yes, you can even kung super me talaga, exclamation mark, capital M-E, It's the chronic fear according to the APA. It's the chronic fear that we feel helpless. Kasi my God, ang daming typhoon. Pati si Dr. Bagtasa. Ang daming typhoon, ang daming problema, ang laki ng climate change, ang laki ng disaster. Sino ba naman ako? What can I do about it? And you know, this is not research based yet, but I would presume, and siguro this will be my master's, ang dami natin, me din. I've experienced eco-anxiety. And this is the subject of my goal na master's degree. No? I want to take a look at what is the quality and quantity of the environmental stories we cover. But I personally, from my observation and work with AYEJ, we realize that our eco-anxiety is really because of the way we tell stories about climate and the environment. When you think climate, when you think environment, it's really disaster, flood, risk, death. And it's further proven with, this is it. This is the media, this is the agenda setting theory of the media. Because when we talk about climate, when we talk about environment in the mainstream, it's disaster. But then, this study by the Harvard Humanitarian Initiative in 2017, which was released in the Climate Risk Management Academic Journal, said there's so much going on in terms of the climate crisis because the Philippines is one of the most climate vulnerable countries in the world. And yet, even though the Philippines is one of the most climate change vulnerable countries in the world, the Harvard study shows that there is a low level of climate change awareness among us Filipinos. But here's the thing about that research study. While there is a low level of climate change awareness among Filipinos, in that same study, they said that there's a high level of concern on the impacts of climate change. This got me thinking. And think about it for a second. I don't know. I don't have an answer to this. But bakit kaya? And maybe you can join the discussion and give your ideas. Anybody. Because I want to engage with all of you, even the scientists in the room. In your just assumption, why do you think that there is a low level of awareness on climate change, but there's a high level concern on the impacts of climate change? It caught my attention, this study, because there's a gap. There's that gap. Low level of awareness, high level of concern. And ako personally, based on my work and based on my observation, I think it goes back to this. I think it is about the way media covers environmental stories. If you talk about death, if you talk about disaster, our audiences, kayo, will feel hopeless, helpless, and not empowered to do anything about it. If we shift the way we cover climate and environmental stories, kasi we learned yung audiences natin, pagod na po being a spectator. Our readers and our audiences now want to become more proactive consumers of climate news. Meaning, yes, we know the climate crisis is happening now. What can I do about it? We know the impacts. What can I do about it? How can I help in this conversation? What can I do on my level? So we really need to have that media shift. There is still a lot to do in terms of media coverage. That was in 2017. And we wanted to do another content analysis of media coverage, and we did it through our trainings just from May to April 2021. Now, who can guess of the 1,176 stories we analyzed from May to April in our select newspapers? Can anybody guess how many of the 1,100 stories were about climate or the environment? And the person who gets it right will get Food Panda or Grab from Dr. Bagtasa. Or Ma'am Pernia. The closest answer, everybody. The closest guess. Sige, I'll give it 5 more seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Time's up. Time's up. Oh, mayroon tayong super lapit na answer. Okay. Ang daming guesses. Sige, I can't scroll down all. But the correct answer to this is, wow, madaming more than 100, 540, less than 80, 500. Very inspiring numbers, no? But in our content analysis, there were only 34. From May to April, of the 1,000 stories that have been covered in the media, Josephine got it right, closest with 35. Doc Bagtas, cheaters. Josephine Arnante, I'll take note of your name. She answered 35. There were only 34 stories in the span of 1 month about media, about climate and environment. And these were the kinds of stories that were really making up the newspapers. 20% business, 18% politics, lifestyle, health. Tingnan nyo. Science and technology, environment, 6%. 100% of the news topic distribution, 6% ang nabibigay sa climate and environment. And when we tried to analyze what kind of environmental stories, they were straight news, they were editorials, and they were features. And when we investigated further the tone of these environmental stories, we found out again that it's just straightforward. There is death. There is calamity. It's very straightforward reporting. 20% interpretative. 12% emotional, assertive, and light. Majority of the environmental stories, of the 6% of environmental stories covered within those dates, more than 60% were just straightforward environmental stories. So with our work and capacity building with young people, we asked them for their insights. We did an FGD. How do you find these environmental stories? They said that stories are not impactful. The quality of environmental stories are too straightforward. There is no discussion of implication to environmental issues. People just say flooding. People just say basura. People just say deforestation. What does this all imply? Data is insufficient. Greenwashing. Mas madami pa daw ads kaysa sa actual environmental stories. Generally, environmental stories are treated as negative, sad stories. And this is very problematic precisely because, and I will present in a case study where I will reference one of our speakers this afternoon, precisely because communication is so powerful, especially in the time of crisis, especially because we are at the front of receiving crises. Sabi dito, this is laid out from one of our playbooks on playbooks on environmental journalism that we developed. This what we call the Green Beat Playbook. This book, we want to teach journalists and communicators how to effectively communicate the climate story. This is from the Climate Tracker, and sabi nila climate change communication can become a matter of life and death. And Dr. Lagmay, one of our speakers today, said that he did everything he could communication-wise, but no one seemed to care. And Dr. Lagmay mentioned that. Sabi dito, back home, at least 7,000 people died because of Haiyan. The main culprit, confusion about what the country was facing due to lack of good communication. Nobody knew what a storm surge was at that point. And further in the article, here we will read, where was the gap? While the Philippines has always been a country that experiences many weather and climate-related events, people still lack knowledge on climate change. There was already a knowledge gap on climate change and its impacts, such as weather events and the risks people face. In this case, the failure to communicate climate change its impacts and risks, such as an extreme weather event like Haiyan, led to the loss of lives of thousands of people, all because, and this is sweeping, but in my assumption, no one understood what a storm surge meant. There have been many movements in media throughout the years on how to tell the climate story, how to tell the science story, how to tell the advice story. For example, the media, or at least the Guardian, so this is from the Guardian, we no longer want to use the term climate change in our coverage. Can anybody tell me what we use now? The media, specifically the Guardian, they have changed their style guide or the way they talk about climate and the environment. And these are just one of the important changes in coverage that the media has done. That's right. Althea, Rachel, we no longer want to say that it's climate change because it is no longer it's changing. It has already changed, and we want to call it a climate crisis or a climate emergency because the media needs to reflect the seriousness of the overall situation of the climate crisis. And so we're practicing this with a edge. Hindi na po climate change yung ginagamit namin. Climate crisis and climate emergency na din. Okay? Climate skeptic. Anybody knows what the media has done to change the use of the term climate skeptic? Climate skeptic are people who don't believe in climate change. Okay? The OED defines a skeptic as a seeker for the truth, the inquirer who has not yet arrived at a definite conclusion. The media has done its best. That's right, Earl. You're correct. It's climate denier. All right? Most climate skeptics, we don't want to call them climate skeptics anymore because there is overwhelming scientific evidence to show that climate change is happening and that it is caused by human activity. Hundreds upon thousands of scientists agree it is climate consensus. So to say someone is a skeptic about the climate crisis is inaccurate. Denier is more accurate. And this is what media organizations have done to further and deepen our conversation when it comes to climate issues. Okay? Finally, carbon emissions. The media is encouraged to not mention the word carbon emissions anymore. Can anybody guess what is our alternative to using the term carbon emissions? Think about it. Carbon footprint. Pwede actually. I've not thought about that. Pwede carbon footprint. But specifically, yes, for Ferdinand Angelo Magnay. Ooh, how are you connected to Inca Magnay? No, okay. Yeah, that's right. Sorry. We no longer use carbon emissions. We use greenhouse gas emissions. Now, there are scientists who know better than me, but carbon emissions is not inaccurate, okay? But if we're talking about all the gases that specifically warm the atmosphere and further the climate crisis, the term greenhouse gas recognizes all of the climate damaging gas, including methane, nitrogen, nitrous oxide, CFCs, etc. So there have been movements in the media landscape to adapt to the way we communicate media and the climate. Now, and that's why we do science communication in the first place, because we want to be able to communicate the work that scientists have been doing. We're all surrounded by a lot of science. I mentioned greenhouse gases, carbon footprint, and a lot of things make us curious. And it can come from daily items and mundane questions like, why is the sky blue, diba? Or why does my skin react to this skincare product? Or what is the implication of heavy rains during a supposed dry season? Now, a lot of these questions have already been answered. And can be explained through scientific knowledge that has been generated na nagawa na through research and discovery over time, right? And that's why we do science communication. The practice of getting this scientific knowledge and reporting it in the mass media in a language that is comprehensible to a non-specialist like you and I, tayo mga non-scientists, is what we call science communication. And we need to improve our efforts in science communication because that is the call of the times. That is the need of the time. Oh, sorry. Why do we do this as I end my presentation? Why not? But 3 reasons why we need to do science communication or science journalism effectively. Una, because it is the public's main source of information about science and technology, mass media. Okay? In a study in 2019, the vast majority of non-specialists or general audiences obtain almost all their knowledge about science from journalists. Journalists, in this sense, the media, are the gatekeeper. No, not the gatekeepers. The frontline guardians of information with regards to science that needs to be communicated effectively to audiences. Okay? So the media has an obligation to keep all of us informed, which is why we do science journalism. Why do we do science journalism? Because there is a growing number of scientists and an increase in research expenditure. I'm not sure here in the Philippines, I can't speak for scientists, but I hope there is, no? Which means we are more graced with more research findings than ever before. Alam nyo ba, pati sa United States, I read a study that there are more journal articles published every year than there are games, elections, or murders combined. Okay? While there is no shortage of science stories to tell, climate stories to tell, environmental stories to tell, there is a shortage of journalists and communicators who tell these science stories and tell these science stories well. And finally, why do we do science communication? Because science development affects all of us. And it has been underscored by our 2 previous speakers how weather, how climate really impacts us Filipinos. It can either tell us what's dangerous, why it's dangerous, what we need to do, what we should not do. Right? That all of us, we need to grasp not only the science, but its interactions with our everyday life. Because science intersects on everything related to us. Right? For example, science and behavior. A study showing that drinking 8 glasses of water is a healthy habit. Science and politics. Scientific study showing when life begins, when is it really cold? Is it really killing a life? When you're doing abortion, all these scientific questions and scientific research and scientific findings are related to us. That's why we need to be able to communicate this well. And finally, we all need to understand as consumers of the sciences and as consumers of these information about environment, climate, and science that there is a level of uncertainty. Hindi yan madedenay, and the previous speaker, the speaker before me underscored how we need to know that there is uncertainty in science. Because number 1, science is a very creative discipline, which means there are many different ways of approaching any research question or conducting experiments and interpreting results, no? Even when 2 scientists view the same results, they might not interpret it the same way. Although scientists, typically follow the scientific method of inquiry, there are many different objective and unbiased ways to do this for any experiment. So science is dynamic and creative in that sense. And scientific knowledge is always expanding. This is because we gain new insights with more research into specific topics. And because inaalaw na po tayo ng technology. We had the technology of NOAA that funding stopped in 2016. I don't know why, but it was reaping international awards. Big question mark. I don't know why that would happen. Now, something about science is what was commonly held to be true 5 years ago might not be true today. What's true about COVID in 2020 might not be true in 2022. It's always expanding. And finally, there is uncertainty in science because a vast majority of conclusions are based on measures of probability. What does that mean? So scientific research relies on objective statistical analysis of results. However, scientists form conclusions based on the probability. That's the keyword. The probability or likelihood for an explanation of an explanation for what causes the results being the correct one. Science is virtually never certain, which means it is important to indicate the degree of confidence that scientists have for a particular result. And that's why they always say, we saw it sa presentation ng ating mga scientists, they always say, further research needs to be done. Okay? While there is uncertainty in science, I am certain that we need to continue effectively telling stories about climate and the environment. Because ultimately, we're not doing it for the trees and the turtles and the flooding. We're ultimately doing it because Filipinos depend on our environment. We need to tell stories of the environment to improve the lives of those who depend on it. That's why let scientists do their incredible work. Let media tell stories of these incredible work of the scientists. And us as audiences, let's be more critical consumers of information that arrive on our phones or that we hear on the news. Okay? Let's let the earth be heard. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vestil, for that invitation to continuously be aware of what's happening around us through consumption of reliable information, and looking at understanding more how science is being communicated in climate and all these different changes that are happening in the way that we communicate climate change or climate emergencies and also science in general. All right, so at this juncture, we heard the inputs of our resource persons. Let us now start our discussion with just some brief reminders for everyone. For our participants, please use our chat box for your questions and comments. We will try to combine similar questions and comments to help manage our time. And finally, let us all be respectful to each other during this discussion. At the end of the day, this is a dialogue. We all want to learn something from each other. And so respect is very much appreciated among all of us. Okay, so let me check first the chat box. I think at this point, are our students, are our participants still alive? Kaya nyo pa bang galawin ng baso? Kaya nyo pang galawin ng baso? If you're still okay, please put out a heart reaction for everyone, please. Can you please show us a heart reaction? Thank you. Thank you sa mga gumalaw ng baso. So just to let us know that you're still there. Okay, so please feel free to put in your questions and your comments. And if you have specific questions to specific panelists, please feel free to address it to them in your question. Okay, I think medyo nahihiya pa. We can all open up, everyone. So please do put in your questions. So let me begin this discussion with this comment about how science communication, risk communication in general, is seen to be quite expert-centric. We are all listening from the scientists. In this COVID pandemic, we talked about the health sciences, being the experts, and all of the information are coming from the experts. And people say that this makes it less appreciable by the general public. So the consumption and the appreciation of this expert-centric communication can become a hindrance, no, in disseminating information in the public. Could I ask our panelists to comment on this statement?
Maybe ask
I
our
thi-
panelists to also turn on their video.
The other videos. Thank you, Miss Mary. And we have Doc Bagtasa and Dr. Lagmay. Ayan. Siguro we can start with Mr. Vestil. With this in your comment to this idea na most of our science and most of our risk and environmental concerns that are being broadcasted they're coming from experts, and being expert centric may make the information less it would make it more difficult to consume for the general public.
Yeah. Well, number one, yes, it should be coming from experts because these science issues, scientific issues, environmental issues, climate issues should always come from scientists and experts in that field, domain expertise. But now the concern is it becomes too highfalutin, too jargon, precisely because that is not the job of a scientist to communicate. No, initially, they're doing the research work, they're doing all these experiments, and then you expect them really to be excellent at communicating these issues. That is not their responsibility. That is responsibility of the journalist and communicator. That is why much of the work that IEJ has been doing in the past 2 years, we're just 2 years old, is really talking to scientists, conversing with scientists, and figuring out how best can you communicate your scientific findings. In fact, very timely, because we're working with the University of the Philippines Marine Science Institute, yung UPMSI. We're gonna have capacity building on marine science journalism. We're gonna teach emerging journalists or practitioners how to effectively communicate scientific research. While I know that there is much work being done on building the capacity of scientists to communicate their work well, which is great, which should be done. Also, obligado din ang media and journalists, obligado din to know how to communicate the work of scientists really well.
Thank you, Mr. Vestil. How about Dr. Bagtasa? Especially you're talking about yung sa forecasting, sir, no? There's this miscommunication. Is there an issue really with having all of these information coming just from a pool of experts?
Yeah, yes, I think yung medyo elitist yung dating. Although ako yung nasa kabilang side. Especially kasi, di ba, in the past, I don't know, several years, from mid-2010s, 2015, naging dirty yung word na elite, yung elitist. So, it shouldn't be kasi elite naman yung mga doctor, elite naman talaga, kakaunti lang sila. Scientists should be elite, kakaunti lang. So, experts are elite, pero yun nga, may naging madumi yung word na elite. So, elitista yan and so on. So, I think the problem also lies in the appreciation of the eliteness of the kung saan nanggagaling information. So, yes, I think may problem, and yun tulad nga na nabanggit ko kanina na there are sometimes the science makes a lot of sense to me, but for others hindi pala. So it's sometimes, diba, dahil sa iba yung way ng perspective ng pagtingin ng scientist, it cannot be relayed to layman, for example, na very efficiently, unlike communicators halimbawa.
Thank you, Dr. Bagtasa. How about sa inyo po, Dr. Lagmay, particularly with the risk communication, what can you say about this really expert-centric approach that we still seem to have?
Oo. Yung bang sinasabi niyan ay reference sa mga authorities na kailangan authority lang. Ang pag sinabi expert-centric, that it is an authority kung saan yung pinanggagalingan and it must be official.
Mhm. Yes, sir.
pag-warning. Tingin ko naman, tama lang naman yon na may nagsasabi
Sige, sir.
na official. Kasi you cannot stop people from interpreting things, no? Ang importante yung space na yon, no, na kung ano-ano yung mga iniisip, misinterpretation, merong disinformation, merong misinformation. Ang ayaw natin yung may mali siya. And that space must be occupied always by authorities, no, para maging official and para hindi maging magulo. But at the same time, kailangan din na ma-empower kasi yung mga tao. That is why we encourage yung openness ng data, di ba? Kasi pag may sinabi yung authority, no, na scientific daw, no, and you will ask them to take some action. Kailangan yung ganong klaseng sinabi na that demands action from the people must be trusted, di ba? It must be trusted. And science requires a high level of trust, di ba? Kasi pag may sinabi kang sa science na something scientific, it must be replicable. So kaya kailangan ng open data. Kailangan yung mga tao ay empowered. They can see also for themselves real-time data, what is happening sa environment, so that they can check and counter-check the science that is being said by the authorities. And sometimes pwedeng i-challenge 'yon, 'di ba? Kasi pag sinabi na kunyari okay ang dolomite, no? Okay ang dolomite diyan. Paano natin ma-verify kung okay nga 'yon, 'di ba? Pag sinabi lang kasi ako yung authority, kaya okay 'yan. It does not work that way. Science does not work that way. So, pag sinabi expert-centric, dapat pag sinabi mong nagsalita ka at expert, you must be willing to be challenged. And therefore, whatever you say, kailangan merong data ka na that is used or evidence that will be used to support what you are saying. So kailangan, pag maramihang tao na, no? So dapat may data rin silang available. And that is why empowering the people is very important. In that sense, hindi nagiging masama yung tingil dun sa expert. Parang the expert says it, tapos na-challenge siya and he can defend it. Sa ganung paraan, magiging trustworthy. At tandaan natin, in communication, importante ang trust. If there is no trust, you cannot communicate. And that is why science must be amenable for challenge, for questioning, for vetting, kailangan ma-replicate, and dapat open ang mga scientists, the authorities especially. When they something, they should be open to challenges because as Val said, merong mga uncertainties, pwedeng i-question. But how can we question kung sasabihin lang na ang reason kung bakit ganon is because I am the authority? That is not supposed to be the case. Kasi sometimes the authority may be wrong. And it's very important that we need to educate the people. Kailangan ng general education sa courses, sa college, sa lahat, no? Kailangan nagpa-participate sila sa disaster risk reduction. They do it on a daily basis. They participate in crowdsourcing, collecting data para mas na i-inspire silang to participate and to have ownership in the problem about climate change and disasters. Problems about our environment. Siguro my point is, okay yon, may authority, pero sa science, kailangan palaging evidence-based. It must be replicable and we need data for that. For the data to be open so that everything can be challenged, so that we can always arrive at evidence-based mga statements.
Thank you, Dr. Lagmay. No? And I think that traces the issue that Dr. Lagmay mentioned, yung trust. It's very important. So transparency, openness to other findings or opinions becomes very important. Ayan, nabuhay na ang ating mga kasama dito. may mga tanong na, no? This one is from Margaret, no? But I'd like to combine her question with Princess's question. No? Sabi niya, in your opinion, given all of these, I assume, given all of these challenges that we have in communication, what would be the best course of action to raise awareness, no? And maybe starting a movement for the better, no, regarding climate crisis. How about students? What can students do? What course of action can students take in order to promote awareness regarding climate change? Siguro po we can start naman with Doc Bagtasa, okay lang ba? Kayo naman po mag-start and then we'll go to Mr. Vestil.
In terms of what we can do, medyo skeptical ako that we can still do many things, especially tayo na galing sa isang maliit na bansa that our emissions are really small. So in the grand scheme of things, parang what can we actually do? It's just to prepare, to brace ourselves and prepare for what's coming. In terms of mitigation, kasi it's really is up to, for me, it's really up to the big countries, big emitters na yeah. So we just have to push them na bawasan yung and to sometimes they do say na babawasan, di ba? But we look at the data, it's still increasing yung emissions. So di ba yung sila doon sa word nila in terms of decreasing the emissions. But
Thank you, Doctor.
That's me.
Thank you, sir. How about Mr. Vestil? Sa tingin nyo ba, sir, what can we do? Concrete steps that students in particular can do to further promote climate change awareness?
I re-echo Dr. Bagtas's feelings about skepticism on we contribute less than 0% of carbon emissions globally. But that, I agree with that. But that shouldn't mean that we just stop, sit and stare as destruction unfolds before our very eyes. And it has been done by young people, specifically Greta Thunberg, to bring the attention of policymakers when it comes to greener policies, when it comes to the protection of the environment. I'm not encouraging everyone to be rallyists and activists and go out in the street. If that's your form of activism, go ahead. But what I'm saying is, that the Fridays for Future movement in 2017 birthed the Green Party of the UK, meaning policymakers are listening to young people rallying on the streets and saying, please put attention on the climate crisis. But on our level, the practical steps that I encourage all of you, that I can encourage all of you to do is find a connection between your coursework, between your expertise and climate. Because as I said kanina, the climate and the sciences intersects with almost all studies, with almost all courses, with almost all kinds of lives. I want you to use your expertise and your course and your interests and passion and find the connection between that and the climate. Do your research, read about it, see what has been done, see what's being done, and see what more can be done. Your expertise, tourism and climate, my expertise yan. Sports science and climate, my connection yan. Biology and climate, my connection yan. Mass communication and climate, my connection yan. Find your center. If this is a Venn diagram, find that center sweet spot. And if you want to do something, bridge your passion, your expertise with climate and environmental issues and see where you can go from there. Because that's how, I speak from experience, that's how I did it. To design and develop the Association of Young Environmental Journalists.
Thank you, Mr. Vestil. Doc Mahar, ano ang advice sa kabataan in order to still continue push for awareness on the climate crisis?
Okay, awareness lang ba ang pinupush natin o action? Okay, dalawa, nadinig ko kay Jerry, no? Sabi ni Jerry, mitigation, climate change mitigation, at meron pang isa, yung climate change adaptation. Doon sa climate change mitigation, that is kailangan natin i-reduce yung sabi nga ni Val, greenhouse emissions, no? Largely mga carbon emissions 'yan, ano? ang Philippines naman, maliit lang ang contribution natin, ano? But meron pa rin tayong pwedeng magawa, no? Pababain yan. But I think we are in the Philippines parang the ones that are at the end, no? At the receiving end of the climate change adverse impacts, no? Ang tawag naman doon, so that we can absorb, no, and become more resilient against this future, or maybe they're happening now, adverse impacts. We have to plan our communities. That is called climate change adaptation, no? Each city and municipality should have their climate change adaptation plans, no? Mga plans mainstreamed into their comprehensive land use plans. They have to have their local climate change action plans, their climate and disaster risk assessments, no? If you want to help, no, there's a lot of ways that you can help your community, no, your LGU. One, ask nyo yung inyong mayor, no, sa LGU, have you planned the city or municipality for climate change, for anticipatory action? Umpisahan natin sa mga mapa. Tignan nyo yung methodologies ng ginagamit ng hazard maps, kung ang methodologies nila ay up to the historical record lang. If it is only based on anecdotal accounts or interviews that they make hazard maps for floods and landslides and storm surges, that is not a climate change scenario. You have to look for hazard maps that are probabilistic in nature. That means that they have to be multi-scenario per hazard. Hindi lang yung worst case scenario based on the historical record, but it must reflect the hazards of the future, incorporating climate change scenarios. Mas malaking baha, mas malaking storm surge dahil mas malakas yung hangin, mas maraming landslides dahil mas maraming ulan, no? Look at those probabilistic risk assessments. If they are not probabilistic, you are not talking about climate change adaptation. Yan ang mga pwedeng magawa ng mga tao. And then once they are available, make sure that the plans of the community are following the vision of the people of that community, no? When that is already established, plan for that vision, anticipate the hazards, plan across all sectors of society. Kailangan sa coastal concerns, environment, education, tourism, energy, infrastructure, etc. So lahat may role, di ba? Lahat may role. Participate in those. May mga tinatawag na stakeholders, no? Sa UPRI, marami kaming ginagawa na pag-help sa mga communities ng CLUP, mga mapping exercises, paggawa ng 3D maps sa community level, barangay level. Everybody must participate, especially in your community. Know your neighborhood in terms of climate change hazards. Saan ba kayo pupunta pag may warning? If you don't know it yet, know it. Go to the probabilistic hazard map tools, no? Yung mga sites na meron ganon. The NOAA website does have all of those resources. Look at them. Know your neighborhood. And once you know them, you teach it to your brother, to your sister, to your father, to your lola, and to your friends, to your neighbors, no? So ang dami pong pwedeng gawin. I can go on and on and on and on, no? So basically it will all end up to awareness, no? Because awareness is the first step towards disaster preparedness. Kasama dyan ang climate change impacts. Kasi disaster risk reduction din naman yon. Only that we are anticipating the bigger event of the future due to climate change. That is my advice.
Thank you, Dr. Lagmay, no? Thank you, sir, for that. We have some other questions, but I think we are a little bit pressed for time. Actually, I was going to ask everyone for a pabaon, no? But I think Mr. Vestil and Dr. Lagmay and Dr. Bagtasa, may mga pabaon na yun, no? So just to end this discussion, this afternoon, I just want to summarize this a little bit, no? First, what we've heard from our experts is that continuously the science is developing. How we understand the environment, how we understand climate change, and then it becoming a climate emergency. We are constantly learning new things, no? And as we learn these new things, we find ways of communicating them to the public, whether it's through traditional media, social media, print media. No? Earlier, when Mr. Vestil was presenting yung newspapers, was actually wondering, marami pa ba sa atin yung nagbabasa ng dyaryo, no? Because my students in PUP, in Ateneo, most of them don't even see a physical newspaper anymore. And I'm not saying they don't read, but it's just that there's this change in preference and how people consume. And the different sectors in our science communication and our science communities are trying to disseminate accurate information through different modalities that are available. And we laud everyone's effort in doing that. Now, for us who are consumers of science, science information, climate information, risk information, as Mr. Vestil and Dr. Lagmay mentioned, we need to keep ourselves immersed in these things. No, we need to learn more. We need to read because that brings us empowerment. No, and if we have a chance to share it with other people, by sharing accurate information and finding ways to further explain and make it more consumable for everyone, that's also empowering others. And when we empower people, we involve more people. If you know more about something, you can find ways of participating in the solution. You look for ways to be involved in mitigating the impacts of this climate emergency. And when we include people and we involve people, we empower ourselves, that as Dr. Lagmay mentioned, that brings further awareness, a deepening of our understanding, and later on preparedness. And hopefully, ito naman yung aking 2 cents in, no, part of my research is disaster resilience, risk resilience, is we become a more resilient community. No? Hindi lang siguro in terms of disaster resilience, even environmental resilience. Now, things are changing in the natural environment, and the most that we can do is live through it. And by becoming more resilient, we become the best survivors that we can be. And hopefully in the future, if there's still a chance, I don't know how the scientists feel about this, baka naman pwedeng ma-reverse pa natin and we can, change our Earth, the condition of our climate, of our natural environment to something better than it is now. So, again, we would like to thank our guests for today, our speakers, Dr. Mahar Lagmay. Okay, thank you very much. We have Dr. Garry Bagtas. Thank you, sir. And we have Mr. Vestil. Thank you very much for joining us today. And we thank our students for participating. And for the questions na hindi nasagot, I'll pass it on to MCAD Manila, maybe as ideas for future engagements. Thank you to our resource persons and thank you for taking time to join us. I'll turn this back over to MCAD Manila for announcements and other information about this event and upcoming events. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dalupang. Thank you also to our speakers for this afternoon, Dr. Bagtasa, who had left for his class, Dr. Lagmay, and Mr. Vestil. A lot of the things that they have discussed was very much an eye-opener for everyone, given their expertise. They have been able to share with us the ideas regarding particularly the uncertainty that we face, and that while it is also part of our lives, it can be addressed by science, by research, and as Dr. Lagmay has pointed out, a lot of the research can be done by experts, and you can question it, and there's also the idea of cooperation with them, so that the less uncertain you are, the more actions you take. So we hope you take action also, and we'd like to take this opportunity at this point for you to do some more research by going to the online exhibition, the Tropical Climate Forensics, where we have some of the data from the past, from the Manila Observatory archives, as well as the present, and we'd like to imagine what the future will be. So thank you very much, everyone, and have a good afternoon.